Kind of like a sanctuary, whether it's academic or community, whether it's for art or whether it's just to socialize with people.
This collective spirit within El Centro is like a home away from home, especially on a campus that doesn't have our reflection of it.
Well, it's a place that I believe that every school, every university, every community needs to have.
You can always come in here and always find someone, or if not, it's very laid back. You can study, there's a study rooms.
Activism, scholar activism, love for your community, love for our raza. It means so much. It means self-development.
It feels like home. Like when I hear people talking in Spanish or anything else, or just kind of similar experiences that we go through as people of color.
Our history, our historia. If we don't know our history, where are we going?
First of all, the country of the United States was in all kinds of turmoil during the 60s. Civil rights movement, racial and ethnic groups striving for identity, Vietnam War, and I don't know if you recall, but there are many cities in the country burning during this period of time. It was a tremendous tension in the late 60s.
What was happening in the 1960s within national structures, even within the state of Califas, with the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement.
It was the first week of school. Everybody was registering for classes and stuff in the fall of 1968. And UMass had just had their first meeting of the year, and Thursday of that week, and then Sunday night, the Black Students Union took over North Hall. And Monday, and eventually Tuesday, the Chicanos, some of them joined the Black Students Union, students in there, but the blacks took the initiative and had a list of demands which had to be negotiated, and that was the start of it. But the Chicanos were catapulted into action. Either were standing on the sideline or they were involved. It was called the United Mexican American Students, and it was created in 1967 here on campus. They went through the campus directory and called every Spanish surname they found in the book, and indicating they were having an organizational meeting and wanted them to come for their first meeting. It was 67, and so they created an organization, and there were several UMass chapters in Southern California. There was some in LA, Loyola Marymount, UCLA, Northridge, San Diego. So this just became a new one here at UCSB. The students in 1969 needed advisors for student organizations, faculty or staff. And as I mentioned, UMass had their first organizational meeting in the fall of '68, where they, Fernando de Necochea, myself, and Jesus Chavarria went to the meeting. And we didn't know each other. We didn't know Jesus at the time. He was brand new faculty member. And that's where we met. And the students were quite pleased to find 3 Chicanos here where the year before they had none. It just happened and it turned out perfect, and so they asked us to be advisors. And so we played our advisor role all the way through and including the development of the Chicano Studies proposal. And I keep feeling bad about it. I should be saying Chicano, Chicana, but that was what it was called then, and that's the way I remembered it. In that proposal, we wrote about creating an academic department, a organized research unit, And she brought from EOP a component of it calling it Chicano EOP. And then creating a colección up in the library because at the time there was very little multicultural material available. Once the proposal was written, it was submitted to the chancellor, and it went through the appropriate committees on campus. As a result of a lot of meetings over time, eventually the administration approved the concept of Chicano studies, where we created an academic department, an organized research unit, EOP, Chicano EOP, and the library that eventually became the Colección. It got to the point that after several meetings we were getting discouraged until someone scouted out Building 406, is what it's called at the time. Had 2 floors. We could put the EOP on the bottom floor with some offices here, department faculty offices on top, with a research center and the Colección on the side. And so it took the students some very aggressive meetings with the administration to finally secure the building. And it was secured in January of 1970. And I was responsible for bringing the EOP component here from where it was, located on the other side of campus. We were functioning as a unit by the end of the 1970 academic year, and the first job was to get the recruitment of Chicano faculty underway. After contentious meetings, it wasn't simple. Space is a big deal, I mean, on this campus. The student leadership took its credit for this building because they scouted out the campus. We found a place that could take our concepts and do exactly what we wanted to do, but we had to fight for it. MEChA was created as a statewide name as a result of the Plan de Santa Barbara meeting that took place at Francisco Torres, used to be called Francisco Torres, Residence Hall. The students had their own workshop, and they decided to come out with a unifying concept that would bind all the students, well, in Aztlan, but basically in California, northern and southern, and they agreed on the term MEChA.
Mexican American Youth Organization, Mexican American Student Confederation, and Mexican American Student Association. All those had abbreviations to the unification of MEChA here on the campus.
Berkeley was there, Stanford was there, San Diego was there, Northridge, Long Beach State, very, very involved. Yeah, everybody agreed. It was a small community at the time, of leaders, and so agreements were reached like that, and it was very significant because even now, I mean, that name still exists. Because Santa Barbara had been involved in creating the Chicano Studies proposal, there were other organizing efforts taking place throughout higher education in California, in the CSU and the UC. But there was a lot of places in community colleges, high schools even, who wanted direction as to how this could happen for them. And there was a group, there was a steering committee made up of members of different groups throughout higher education, Chicano Steering Committee. And they agreed that we should put on a conference where we would invite the people that were directly involved or those who would be interested to come to a Friday, Saturday, Sunday conference and get our best thinking together and to see how we can create, which it turned out to be a plan for higher education, a Chicano plan for higher education.
what El Plan de Santa Barbara was a reflection of was a 3-day conference, April 11th, 12th, and 13th of 1969. Out of it, about 250 or so people came, students, activists, raza, and out of it created 8 workshops. And those workshops were basically in higher education, community organizing, student leadership. And so with that, we have a booklet that was created as a blueprint for people to follow and for people to understand, because it creates a conciencia of this collective knowledge.
We committed ourselves with resources. We donated money, and we printed 2,000 copies once it was done in the first edition. And they went, because we were giving them away, you know, to people. There's a historical document too, because very rarely when you have a conference you produce a document like that.
From the 85 people named, it's still indigenous. It's still rooted in their community. Most of our elders that are founders in El Plan de Santa Barbara are still in their barrios and in their communities, mentoring, giving love, giving that cariño, giving those teachings, giving those enseñanzas, which is really beautiful. And imagine each year, other profesoras give that same love. So that organic love that was felt in 1969 has just spread.
This is where MEChA was created, but the campus wasn't a MEChA. It was El Congreso.
Yeah.
Out of history, because if it was named MEChA again, the other group would think that they sold out. What happened here was an internal problems that took place. As more and more Chicanos were coming to the campus, they had their own ideas on leadership. There was a leadership issue. There was another organization, a Chicano organization that was created called La Raza Libre. And that one had an ideological difference between the Chicanos, which were more nationalistic, and La Raza Libre was more, in addition to being Chicano, but they were more third world in their orientation. And so we had 2 simultaneous organizations for 2 or 3 years running on the campus, and people were confused as to who to deal with, because they were both Chicano student organizations, but both with different agendas. Casillas' name is here on the Centro because he was one of several leaders that came in after that who didn't like the fact that we were divided as one, and put together the groups together who come together with the name Congreso, the Congress.
I didn't know him personally because unfortunately he passed away from cancer. But I know the impact that he had while he was here as a student. And from what I know, he was here at a time, he came back from the Vietnam War. He was a veteran. From what I understand, he was a unifier. He and his family, because his other brothers came here as well, had a legacy of student activism, being a part of the community, supporting the community.
Congreso is a campus group. It's a support group and a political organization. It's the official MEChA chapter, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán. But because it's originated here, and we decided to be a little bit more inclusive in terms of the diverse community that the Latinx population includes, like a lot of people. We do some like direct actions. One of them is on Columbus Day here in the US, so like protesting against that and kind of letting people know, like at the main place, like the Arbor, doing that stuff, anti-Columbus, like decolonizing, pretty much getting to know ourselves. We host Dia de los Muertos event for families in Isla Vista, because a lot of times we forget that there are families there. So by bringing piñatas and games and other cultural roots and connecting the kids to that and the families, having music, having food. It's the 25th annual Augusta College Day, and it's really, really significant. It was one of the first student-held conferences. So what I mean by student-held is like everything is put on by the students, everything. And it's the longest running conference at UCSB. Augusta College Day is RCD for short, and we have it every year. It's a conference that brings at-promise or at-risk youth from the Tri-County area, so Ventura, SLO, and Santa Barbara counties, and we bring them over to UCSB so they can get motivated to not only pursue like higher education, but other opportunities after high school, kind of seeing people that they identify with or people of similar backgrounds. When they see them in the higher institutions, it's a way to like kind of empower them that they could be there too. So when we bring them, everything is paid for, the food, transportation, the workshops, and this facilitates their motivation, their like wanting to be here. And then once they come here, we have guest speakers, motivational speakers, and then workshops. And the workshops vary from like educational, so like FAFSA, like how to fill that out, or financial aid, how does that work out, A through G requirements, because not all high schools let their students know about that. And then there's also fun workshops, like Love Your Locas. That's like a very, learning to love yourself and appreciate who you are. And also other workshops that bring in their cultural roots into here, in a sense, kind of to show them that they can still be what they identify as in this institution that usually tells them not to.
SJP stands for Students for Justice in Palestine, and it started around like 2005. It was around earlier, but like that was when it gained like a lot of power, because in Palestine, the Palestinian Civil Society called for BDS for the first time, to meet 3 demands, which is the right of return, because anyone who's left Palestine can't go back. I know people who still have their keys like for their houses and can never go back. There's these like laws against Palestinians who live in Israel, and there's about 50 of them now. And then there's also the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, which is almost 50 years old in June. So those are like the demands of BDS. BDS is just boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and that's when SJP started. So we work on educating people about like Palestinian issues, because a lot of times the biggest problem is that people just think Palestinians are evil or whatever. They think that because they're not educated about the issue at all. Like everyone, the only thing they see is Israel is defending themselves, and it's repeated over and over by the media. And honestly, it's not true. There's been many times where Israel sent the first strike. There's been brutal murders, there's been military influences and inside of the West Bank and Gaza, and also removing people from the West Bank and Gaza and putting them in prisons for no reason, with no charges. Israel, as I said earlier, has an ongoing occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and it was started in 1967 around, I think it was June 10th. People always think about the West Bank wall, what we call the apartheid wall, as something that is only along the border of the West Bank, and that's just not true. What it is doing is it goes within the territories. It goes in between towns. Sometimes it crosses it crosses between people and their farms, people and their neighbors. There's been many times where the wall has made it impossible for people to live the way they used to. I know someone whose entire house is just in one section of the wall. Like, there's nothing else in that section of the wall except one guy's house. And he's separated from everyone. And so this wall is terrible. It's very huge, and it's an example of trying to erase the Palestinian existence from other people's lives. There's constantly settlements being built, constant military presence. If you go to Jerusalem in the Old City, everywhere you look, you see IDF soldiers. I remember being in my family's hometown, and like you would see tanks drive down the road. Like it's a military state. There is no way to exist there without knowing. Obviously, you have the less power there.
When I got here, there was a lot of stuff that happened before I got here because it was my first year, and I could feel it. There was a lot of division, a lot of issues, a lot of drama, not only with the people who used this space, but also the people who came to school here and the people who were active here politically. And it was nice to get together with people, that core group of people who felt strongly enough to do something and change that. People started to organize and develop the ideas and, be more specific about what our concerns were, because we knew it wouldn't be just us that would reap the benefits. It was for the people who came after us. And so that's a lot of the discussion that happened, and people were willing to go to extreme measures to put their life on the line. I was a part of that core group, and it was a beautiful thing to see people come together. It was unfortunate that people were willing to risk their lives to get that, but it was in the making anyway. Some of the things that kind of stand out, or what came out of it, one of them was the great boycott that was going on at the time. That was a pretty easy one for them to agree to, recruiting and guaranteeing that we have more faculty, Chicano faculty, supporting and building the Chicano Studies Department. Eventually the first PhD program in Chicano studies came out of that. Retaining and recruiting Chicano Latino students, retaining being important, the guaranteeing and making sure that there's a commitment to the local community. Some of the people who were organizing were really committed to that because they had done a lot of work in the community, and you can see all the extension of the library. And years back, the big issue was the plan was to have that extension come here. El Centro was one of those things that we wanted to make sure that this was a place that continued. To name it, El Centro Arnulfo Casillas, to renew its commitment to being here and continuing, and for it to be respected and the whole central concept to be respected as well. Everybody served a purpose. And my purpose was not to negotiate, it was not to be in charge of the any of the logistics. It was as a symbol. And we, unfortunately, what came with that is kind of, I think sometimes people put us on a pedestal, and none of us did it for that. None of us want that we're actually hunger striking. It did go for 10 days. And we only drank water that whole time. And we also dealt with a lot of the BS. People called us childish. There was people that would order pizza and have it delivered to us because we were in front of Cheadle. People would come and eat right in front of us. But we also had a lot of support from the community, and people came from everywhere. It wasn't just an isolated event. It was also things happening in UCLA and Stanford and University of Michigan, I believe, other places where these type of struggles were happening. We finally got to a point after 10 days that we had 3 negotiators that were meeting with the administration, and they were reporting back to the larger group, organizing group, and reporting to people who were doing the hunger strike. And so we had this elaborate kind of coordination that was happening at all times. And it finally got to the point where we felt like we had enough. And we also did research that told us that after a certain amount of time, your organs start to deteriorate and break down. One of the guys that was Gilberto Limon, who was studying for the MEChA while doing this for grad school to become and now he is a medical doctor, was explaining to us kind of what was going on in our body when it starts to go into starvation mode. The very last day, which ended up being, ironically enough, Cinco de Mayo, when we knew the evening before that we had come to an agreement, we wanted to make kind of a ceremony, not only to celebrate, but also to honor, even though we were kind of at odds with the administration, they needed to save face as well. So part of it was a political presentation or theatrics, but it was also ceremonial because we come from that background as people. And so we had kind of a ceremony that we not only, it was a signing of the document from the representatives, but also the administration. So they not only signed it at that kind of ceremony, but there was some discussion or some speaking about, from representatives about what it meant to solidify and wrap it up, so to speak. And so at the very end, we ceremoniously broke bread, and it was the first time that
But so Dara Romo was the director of the CSI, pushed us out of it basically. And I remember signing up for the class. It was like a unit class, and her saying, "Oh, sorry, it's too late for." I asked her if I worked on this project with you because I had worked on it with her before, and she was like, "I'm sorry, it's too late for that." And then so by the time I had found another project, she emailed Candy and Nancy and was like, "Hey, actually, we can work this out because you guys."
The struggle continued after that. It was like making sure that they followed through with what they said and continuing that fight. It was just kind of like a fast forward button and get that agreement, but then you had to kind of make sure that they were going to respect that and fulfill it. And I think in many ways they did, because of that struggle, but as time goes on also, you know, new people come in and it gets farther and farther away from that struggle, and that's just the way it is. But you have it as a historical document to be able to look back on, learn from, and use.
The department was given money to start an office here at the end of 406 on July 1, 1970, with, as I mentioned, Carlos Zamora as the first Chicano Studies Department chairman, whose job was to go out and recruit, to bring in Chicano faculty to start teaching in the program. And you mentioned Jesus Chavarria. One of the first courses that were created in the fall of 1971 was Introduction to Chicano Studies, and he gave the first lecture, and I wish to hell it was on tape, because that would have been a classic first lecture, and very popular class, it was packed. That's the life of the department, and from then on it kept growing, and then eventually moved to South Hall.
It's clearly important to recognize that all of this that we're talking about overlays Chumash land, right? But then when you talk about the distinct aspect of it that allowed the Chicanx, Latinx communities to then create an anchor on this campus, then we're talking about that kind of the shift in the use of the building. That was an attempt to architecturally house a centro as a concept. Right, so you were bringing these communities together, one, because there were so few of us, right? You could put us in one building. But two, because you were trying to bring to life, to populate an idea. And I think that's one of the hardest things that we can really struggle with is it's an idea on paper, right? And there's a lot of people who are invested in that and have spent energy, sweat, tears to get that paper written. But then you have to convert that idea into a place that people are coming together for all their differences and all their interests and all these other kinds of things. I think that's what we see in El Centro, right? We see that tension over time. So, I mean, I think you can talk about dates in the building of buildings, and you can talk about the shifts from one part of campus to another. But if you talk about the project, I think the project has been there, and people have been invested in it for a long time.
So on January 9th, 2017, El Congreso was issued a notice, what essentially comes out to be a notice of eviction from the campus building administrator, Ed Schmicken. And it effectively told us that we had 45 days to leave the building because the foundation over the course of many decades has been compromised. Getting that 45-day notice was a real shock. It was a complete shock to the system. We have been fighting tirelessly.
So your questions were, if I recall, there are 45 days to vacate this building. And given that the report indicates an earthquake danger, is there something structural that can fortify the space in those 45 days? This is the first question. The second question was about your actual, the actual statement that that it is a prohibitive cost to correct it. Your response, Ed, was, I don't remember the response to the first question. Your response to the second one was that it was a subjective statement by the consulting firm Van Sant. Is that correct?
Yeah, regarding the expenses.
Yeah. So what was could you share with me what your response is to the first question, which is that in the 45 days that this building will be occupied, given the report, is there an additional earthquake preparedness structural condition that can be put in place?
Due to the severity of the decomposition of the wood structure, I do not think that something could be put in place in 45 days, no.
Okay.
I'd like to acknowledge your presence here and thank you for being here. Yeah. Thank Thank you, gentlemen. I'd also like to acknowledge the labor that has been put in to put Band-Aids on this building by hands, right? By human hands. But from what I've gathered is that you did not come to this meeting prepared in regards to history and in regards to being able to answer certain questions that were brought up. Now I know that you being like the head honcho here, in architecture, you know what's going to happen a couple years down the line. You already have that long-range plan. You guys are already planning 10, 20 years ahead, right? So, what's unfortunate is that I know that you're going to tear this building down. I know that. I could see it. You know, the structural integrity is not going to last very long, especially that being in a wetland, a coastal wetland, and at its elevation. Now, what can we do as students to have direct input in the renovation of this building, and how can we make it as sustainable as possible so that it can meet LEED standards and it can serve generations for years to come. Oh, and how long do you plan on being an architect? Because I want to take your job.
We as a group, from the beginning, were trying to talk about planning about what happens if if you decide the building needs to be demolished, what happens in all these cases, and we kept hearing, day after day, we kept hearing, it's not going to get to that point. Don't worry, it's never going to get there. And so if you'd at least have been honest with us that you hadn't known what was going to happen, that could happen, that could be a possibility, we'd be better prepared for this.
In the 1994, hunger strikers from El Congreso gave their lives up. That there is a contractual agreement with the university and the students of El Congreso to preserve the space indefinitely. I was a Congreso member in '98. We took over with all of the students in the coalition to basically October and ending October of '98. We took over the Chancellor's office to basically stipulate, to reaffirm everything that was said in the '80s, and in '94 with the hunger strike, to reaffirm that el Centro Arnulfo Casillas, el Centro Building 406 would be preserved indefinitely. These are contractual agreements. Hopefully I don't have to dig and grab all that archive. Signed by a letter by Henry Sue Yang.
When this kind of thing happens, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. We're in and out within 4 or 5 years. We don't see this happening as over time because there's such a high turnover rate. So I don't think it's fair to rely on students who are mostly who is occupying this building, because that's a university responsibility to monitor the building.
Monetary things should not be a problem. If you really value our lives, which I hope you do, if you really value our studies.
If y'all are really down for the cause, you'd have a better relationship with us already. We wouldn't have to be asking for this. You would have a better relationship with us all the time, not just when things like this go down.
What sort of problems does restoration without destruction pose? And is that a possibility? Is that even a possibility?
So I can't answer definitively that you can restore it, but I can say we'll certainly look at that.
We've been asking for resources for the Centro and the cultural orgs that meet here for all 4 years that I've been here, and I'm willing to bet it's been a long time before my time here. This isn't just about El Centro. This is about the way the administration views the students, and this is going to keep happening. There's not going to be any progress unless you all change the way you operate, because it's a mentality thing. How did it get to this point? Why weren't there regular checks, despite the fact that this building is over that long? I haven't heard an answer. If it's just it was oversight, then it was oversight. But I haven't heard that is the thing.
The first meeting was 4.5 hours long, and that is probably one of the longest meetings that you've had. Students sitting down across the table from many representatives of the administration, from the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs to Mark Fisher, who is the Vice Chancellor of Administrative Service. You know, there was representation on both ends, and there was a push from students to pause the 45 days. We did not want to leave the building in 45 days, and we made it very clear that we were not going to. So I think one of the most memorable parts of the meeting was when Ed Schmidtgen said that, you know, he asked us, is the building worth risking our lives over? And the answer was, of course, yes. It 100% yes. It was like a resounding, like, some of the other things that we went over in the meeting was the structural assessment of the building that was issued by Van Sand. When we were issued the notice, we were given access to the Van Sand building assessment that essentially stated what the conditions of the building were. So aside from the foundation being compromised because of numerous things like dry rot, insect infestation, the physical building not being connected to the ground and therefore not having a solid foundation within those spaces. There were so many things wrong.
El Centro has been neglected by the campus, again.
So last spring, Margaret and I came in, and we were looking at renovation of the back rooms, and we knew the floor felt soft. These are rooms that we hadn't been in, I hadn't been in ever, and I think they've been locked off for quite a while.
When was the last time that the fire alarms were tested? Do we even have fire alarms in here? The plumbing, those kinds of structural things? Do you have dates for when they were last tested? Are they safe?
You do have fire alarms. You do have fire alarms. As far as when it was inspected, I'm not sure, but the fire, yes.
So we went in there and said, okay, it feels like we have a problem with the subfloor. Let's pull it up, replace it, and we'll recarpet. And when they pulled it up, that's when we found that we had a lot more, well, first we had decay we didn't know about. We knew there was something going on with the plywood.
The building code requires, the current building codes require positive drainage away from the building, so the building slopes, the ground slopes away. And this, we have the opposite situation with it. It actually slopes to the building, so that really compounded it.
In room 136 of building 406, there is an area where termites have done extensive damage and the floor needs to be repaired. Should we contact a contractor for this work, or will FM want to look at it? Sandy. And it's dated November 26, 2013.
40 years later into the movimiento, we're still talking about this place being underutilized and under-resourced by our administration. Again, we still have demand a little bit more from them. It's our taxpayer monies going into this. So when we look at Hispanic serving institutions, well, let them walk the walk now and talk the talk.
Students sat down, analyzed the report. I mean, we tore it apart as much as we could. We looked up California Building Code. We looked up legal codes that were mentioned in the assessment, and during the meeting we brought all of these things up and all of these issues that we had with the structural assessment. One of the biggest issues was that Mark Fisher and Ed Schmidtgen together said that the language in the conclusion of the building assessment was subjective, and we concluded that most of it was subjective. I mean, it had so much inconclusive language to we anticipate the building will not, you know, be up to standard to seismic regulations in California. We predict that, you know, it was a lot of not only subjective information that was given as a part of the assessment, it was the conclusions made by Van Sand that were not fully grounded in as much research and hard evidence that it could have been.
On the one hand, you don't want people watching you, and you don't want people like completely checking what you're doing on a daily basis, because that allows you a greater form of expression and a greater autonomy. At the same time, if you don't have that, then you can run the risk of the opposite, which is neglect. Folks want to respect that it's student space, and I think that there could even be like reserve on the part of the administration to say, well, if we go in there, then is it going to look something like we're trying something that we're not, right? So I think there can be a lot of misinterpretation there, a lot of room for misinterpretation, but I don't think that anybody can contest the fact that there has been neglect.
We concluded the assessment was not to be trusted, and we essentially got the administration as part of the meeting to agree with us in saying that the language was subjective, that there were conclusions made that were not part of the original contract that they made with Van Sand. which was unfortunately what was relayed to the students.
And now we're in a position where there's like an actual crisis. The department is responsible for part of that too, right? We made an agreement with Student Affairs that we were going to house part of that building. And we didn't end up populating it. At least we didn't end up populating it in a productive way. Right? If we had, there would have been yet more activity there that could have highlighted stuff that was needing attention.
So what's happening now is the kickback and the response of all the students who inhabit the space, who fight for the cause of what the space represents.
So from the beginning, El Centro as a building was never meant to be a permanent space. Although since the late 60s, I mean, there has been an enormous push by students to make El Centro permanent.
The people that came up and that are here to support and are committed to supporting believe in it so much that they're not going to stand to let that happen. And administration can say what they want and paint a nice picture, but there's a long history of them breaking their agreements. And as many documents that we have that have renewed that commitment of the university, we can't just believe that they're going to do what's in our best interest.
As an alum, I was pissed when I read that document. I saw very clearly what the intent of that document was. There was already a pre-drawn conclusion, right? And the wording was basically fit to accommodate that. As a parent, I was fucking enraged. And I'll tell you why I'm using that language. Because I have come to the Centro throughout the years, and I have seen the condition, the physical condition. And every time, especially now, I ask myself, would you, who are responsible for the upkeep of that building, allow your children to live in conditions like that? Would you allow your pets to live in conditions like that? And I'm stating this because while I understand we need to move forward, we need to be constructive in our dialogue, but we also understand that there's been a breach of trust.
I remember the first time that we came here and I was a student, and I don't know how many of you might have remembered, that there used to be cadavers upstairs. And so all of us used to kid about the fact that we'd hear noises and we'd wonder if anybody was there, what was going on. But I remember studying until 2 or 3 in the morning. So that building is home to all of us.
The Centro is a unit. And if the university respects the idea of this concept of the Centro, you cannot respect the concept of the Centro if you take bits and you give it to this group and you take another bit and you give it to that group, which are unrelated to El Centro.
Part of what we achieved this morning, January 20th, is that Chancellor Yang came into El Centro, sat with us in the space. It was completely informal but totally welcome. And what he ended up doing was signing an agreement that the 45 days will be nullified as is consistent with Ed Schmidtgen's reassessment of the structural assessment by Van Sant. We were basically promised new negotiations with the building. We were promised that El Centro would remain a top priority with administration to be preserved in the future.
It's just kind of, every so often you have to, it's just something that continues. It's a cycle. And people come in droves to support the struggle.
It's culture. It's pride in a good way, I think, for our people that need it. It means our education. Our education is our empowerment to our own self-identity, our own history, but the empowerment of our community to be of service. So it's critical. El Centro will always remain here. It should be designated a historical Chicana landmark.
It's a lot of good memories, a lot of sad memories, a lot of ups and downs.
The demand that was
And that's
made
been
was that the counselors would be here.
the reason why I come back
Black KOP
whenever
was
I'm
in here, okay, at one time.
invited or
So they
whenever
would be able to take over
I
the
feel like
building.
it's necessary.
Okay.
And I
And that's
try to bring my
administration.
students that I work with
And
as a
that's
counselor.
how we were able to
We don't just take a tour, we
things
try to
going
ask
on in here.
students to give them what they call now the activist tour. And this is a place that they need to know that whether they come here or not, there's always going to be a space somewhere. And if it's not, then you should demand or create it.
It was coming into the space and realizing that the people here will fight for my cause regardless of what it would do to their own personal lives, because my Palestinian rights matter, and so do all these other different groups that people support here.
This place wasn't just given. People fought for it. People got together and made it happen, which is the reason why people have come from far. People are calling in. People are coming to different places, showing their support.
I could be queer and I could be Palestinian and I could be an activist and I could be loud and I could be brash, and people would always support me and be here for me.
The amount of people that have been through this are thousands. And that maybe doesn't mean that much to every single person who walked through here, but you can tell how much it means to so many. And that needs to be respected, and the space needs to continue.
Our history will always be, as long as there's one Chicano in Aztlán, Chicano history and Chicano studies will always exist. Have a